Welcome to Just Break Up, the podcast about love, heartbreak, and all the relationship advice you don't want to hear. My name is Sierra DeMulder.
And I'm Sam Blackwell. And today we're going to answer a letter from somebody who is mourning a complicated loss. But before we begin, we just want to give you our Surgeon General's warning, which is that Sierra and I are not licensed mental health practitioners.
We are just two fools with microphones.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true. I do have some personal advice that's related to this letter because both our dads are dead, but that's it.
Yeah. So Sam and I are not professionals. We are not trained in this. We are just talking about our own lived experiences. So please take our advice as you see fit. We are only here to offer our humble musings to hopefully shed some understanding and maybe some laughs about the incredibly rewarding but mostly confusing experience that is love.
All right, everyone. Our letter today comes from Sir Cries a Lot, whose pronouns are she, her, who is writing from Depression City, baby.
Baby.
Dear Sam and Sierra, I'm not sure where exactly to start, so I'll get to the chase and then thank you for the help that you and your advice has provided so far. The last few months have felt like one bad thing after another. I'm an Enneagram type 2, and hoo boy, asking for the help I need is challenging.
Heyo.
I felt like an emotional drain on my partner and my friends. Then this past week, my biological father died suddenly and unexpectedly. He had severe mental health issues, internalized self-loathing, and addiction issues that made him estranged for a large part of my life. But child me didn't understand the why in why he was gone, and I always wanted him back as my dad. When I was a teen, I was angry he wasn't around. When I was an adult, I had to establish and maintain boundaries with him. No 30 messenger bombs at 3 a.m., no trash talking my mother, and an unspoken, I am not ready to see you right now. The last year, I had gotten more comfortable messaging him, letting him know about my life. He told me about his hopes and plans for the future, like regaining his nursing license, losing weight, spending time with me and my sister. He had been getting better and had been 7 months sober when he passed away. My adoptive dad has been in my life since he and my mom got married when I was 3, and he adopted me in middle school. He's been the one I've called dad for a long time. Your advice and the way you talk about the complexities of people and their wounds has helped me tremendously in changing how I see people. We're all flawed, we all have wounds, and we're all only trying our best with the tools we have. I'm now struggling with complicated feelings. My partner and friends and family know we weren't the closest and are now confused about how and why his death is hitting me so hard. I myself am confused about this deep hurt. I don't regret the boundaries I set, and I'm glad I messaged him with love and kindness. I feel guilty for my grief because I love my real adoptive dad. I feel crushed because I saw how my biological dad was getting better and respecting my boundaries, and now I'm just left with the dreams of a man that few others care about. I'm grieving for my inner child, and I'm grieving for there's a tragedy in seeing how far he came and was going, only for it to be cut short. My therapist has been helpful, but I would love your thoughts. I guess my questions are, 1, how do we grapple with grieving complicated relationships that no one seems to understand? How do I stop feeling guilty about leaning so hard on my support system? What do I do with the wound that is all of these hopes for the future that he and I had? Thank you so much for everything.
Oh, my darling. Thank you so much for trusting us with this letter and for listening. I think you're absolutely right. You're not just grieving this, the journey of this very flawed man. You're grieving the idea of fatherhood, and you're grieving for that little girl, for all of those childhood wounds that he is a part of, that he's stitched into, have sort of been torn open with his passing. So of course, there's a lot of complicated feelings flooding your nervous system and your heart right now.
For sure.
So Sam and I are going to dive into this very touching letter. But first we need to take a very quick break.
All right, everyone, welcome back. Sir Cries a Lot. I'm sorry that you're crying a lot. I know that this is a really hard thing to grapple with, and a really hard thing to feel like you have to hold all on your own, right? That idea that that you're somehow alone in this and that people don't and won't understand, that they can't hold it, that you have to hold it all yourself, because if you hand off a little bit of it, it'll overwhelm people because it feels so overwhelming to you. And I think what is really complicated about this whole situation is that you are not necessarily even grieving the parent that you had, right? I think that you're really grieving the hope for a parent to have been different. And I think probably part of it is the hope and the wishing that he had been different when you were a kid, the hope that you had in wishing that you hadn't had to establish those boundaries with him, that he could have just been a dad that you could love without necessarily needing to make sure that there were firm distances between you. And you're grieving the hope that something could have been different in the future, right? There's like a past, a present, and a future hope that has been dashed by the passing of your dad. And so I think it can be really hard when you're outside of that, your friends, your family, other folks that may be around you, to look at it and say, well, your relationship with your dad wasn't that great. So like, why is this such a big deal for you? But again, you're not necessarily mourning the person. You're mourning the promise of what that person could have been in your life. And that is a huge, insurmountable loss. Like that is a hard, hard thing to hold. So I just want to say that, like, I see you in that. I obviously can't understand it because I haven't lived your life, haven't been in your body experiencing this relationship. But I do see how big it is and how much of it you are holding for yourself. And I want to just say to you that, like, I see how hard this is for you.
Yeah.
And I see how isolated you're feeling because of this. And I see how it feels like no one's ever going to understand this. And I'm hearing how difficult and challenging that is for you.
I want to speak to, the conflict you're feeling over your emotional response to the passing of your biological parent and the love that you have for your adoptive father. It makes so much sense to me, right? It makes so much sense to me it makes so much sense because the human heart has extreme capacity to love and extreme capacity to feel guilty about said loving. It makes sense to me that you are feeling, like, why am I having all these big emotions for somebody that I wasn't that close with? And yet, and also I have this other dad that was there for me, whom I love, who I respect, that makes sense. And also I'm here to, like, tenderly and lovingly remind you that our hearts are not that black and white, and we have an infinite capacity to love. There are many ways for a family to exist. There are multiple ways for families to be made. And there are families out there with multiple fathers. There are families out there with multiple parents. There are families out there with no parents and just elders or community members. And so the idea that you're supposed to only love one father figure at a time, or that only one person can fill this particular place in your heart, is a really unrealistic expectation to put on, that vessel that is capable of so much infinite love, right? And I know you know this, but just say to yourself, like, there's no conflict here. My love for my father, my adoptive father, is not in competition with the grief I feel for my biological parent, right? There's no competition here. There's no conflict. I feel like my anxiety is telling me that there's a conflict because my two-ness, because my sensitivity is trying to tell me that, like, I have to feel feelings that make sense to other people. Like, that's your gift to the world. And I'm here to tell you, like, that is not the way of things. You're going to feel things that don't make sense to other people, but it's not for them to understand. And I would even say that to your loved ones. When you're asking for help, when you're crying again and you're feeling self-conscious about it, you don't have to fit your crying or your grief into a specific shape or form that they recognize. You can say, you don't need to understand this. You don't have to understand this. I know this might look weird from your perspective, but this is what I'm feeling. They don't have to get it. They don't have to get your grief in order to give you permission to grieve it. And if they do, let Sam and I give you permission. You have permission to grieve. I'm giving the full stamp approval. Very grief-worthy life experience right here. I'm going to buy a stamp that says that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that like this kind of competition that you have between your biological father and your adoptive father is like, of course, you're feeling more about your biological father right now in this moment, right? Of course, your emotions are heightened about him because he just passed, right?
Yes.
Like you are feeling all sorts of things because you are mourning him. You are grieving this loss that you have that has deeply impacted you in a big way. But the steadiness of the love and affection that you feel for your adoptive father isn't threatened by the strength and overwhelmingness of the relationship or the emotions that you're feeling for your biological dad, right? Like that. And I know that it kind of feels like that, but remember, right? Our emotions aren't necessarily telling us something important about our values or about things that are happening to us. They're just telling us that something's hurting, right? They're just telling us that we are experiencing something. So I want to just like hold that and say like, it doesn't diminish the love that you have for your adoptive dad, right? It just is that maybe in comparison in this moment, it's not taking up as much of your energy and attention because obviously you need to triage this big feeling that you're feeling for your biological dad and his passing.
Yeah.
But I also think that like this feeling of feeling really guilty about leaning on your support system as well is so challenging because it is like, there is a narrative that I think that I held myself to when my dad died, which was that like, oh, I should be over it at this point, right? Like, and there's tons of reasons why I told myself that, right? Like, oh, I should have seen it coming, or, like it wasn't that bad, or, well, my mom seems to be over it. So like, why can't I get over it? And she knew him for much longer than I did. So like, why am I still holding on to this? Right. All of these reasons why my grief was unreasonable or why it should be less than it was. And I got to tell you that like, all of that sort of beating myself up about like the pace of my grief, the size of my grief didn't actually do anything to support me in my grieving. Right. And it was sort of combined with this idea, like I was telling myself over and over again, you're being ridiculous. This is too much. You should be over this by now. And I just assumed that that's what everyone else around me was also feeling, right? I was like, yeah, they must also think that I'm being ridiculous. They must also think like, oh God, it's been 2 years. Why is he still talking about his dead dad, right? Turns out that is not actually true. Like the people around me were actually much more willing and open to be able to hold me in that grief than I was. And part of it was like, I had to really challenge myself to say like, I need to change my own narrative about how I'm responding and reacting to this grief to be much more accepting of the fact that it needs to happen, that it's important that it happens, that I deserve to be in a place where I can process through this grief so that then I could stop imposing that negative narrative that I had about myself onto other people, right? Assuming that they were feeling the exact same thing about me. Because what actually happened was that more people actually told me they appreciated it when I shared about what I was going through and shared about how I was feeling with my dad because they were concerned about me, right? And I was holding it all in. I was holding it all for myself because I thought that no one else could carry it. And then I had all of these loved ones around me saying like, my hands are open. I'm not going to carry the whole thing, but I can certainly carry part of it with you. Right. Like I just couldn't fathom what it would feel like to break apart that grief in a way that could allow me to give it to other people and that I would just overwhelm them with the feelings that I had. But they were so capable of it. Yeah. That was what was beautiful about it. They were so capable and are so capable of holding it. And I'm talking about friends. I'm also talking about like random people coworkers that I like talk to,
Totally.
right? Who are so capable of saying, oh my God, that sounds really, really hard. I will be thinking of you and holding you today on whatever day it is that you're really feeling this grief.
Yeah. And I want to say it's okay if you're sad about this forever. Like there's no timeline of grief. There's no limit on grief. It's okay. Like, just from an outsider perspective, like this would make me sad forever that he was on this path to betterment and then that path got cut short. It will always make me feel like a lover, right? Like a relationship that didn't ever reach its true potential. I will, it's very natural for us to like feel sadness for the unfulfilled. And this is the ultimate example of unfulfilled. We know what the idea of what parents should and shouldn't be at a very young age. So this is one of your earliest heartbreaks. One of your earliest heartbreaks that is so subconscious to your core. Of course you're feeling this grief, of course. And then as a fellow too, I just want to say, other people don't need you to dress your grief or your sadness or your struggles up in some like more palatable, fancy way. You don't need to put a bow on this. You don't need to present this to other people in a way that makes you feel deserving of grieving. People are ready and willing to take care of you. And even if they can't take care of you, care of you perfectly, that doesn't mean you're less deserving. That doesn't mean that they're less, that they are less, that they're not trying,
Yep.
I think for us twos, we are so good at taking care of other people that when people try to take care of us and it doesn't match what we would do or how we would be emotionally available or how we would respond, it can make us feel really lonely and isolated. It's like an act of self-isolation and harm that we do to ourselves when other people don't love us perfectly while we think they're incapable of loving us,
For sure.
Nobody's going to get what this feels like. Sam and I can empathize. Sam and I we can see the blueprints of how this would feel in our lives, but nobody's going to feel the grief that you feel, and they don't have to in order for them to be there for you or like in order for you to feel like you have the right to be taken care of.
For sure. No, absolutely. And I think that I was laughing a little bit because like that is still something that I have to challenge myself to remember, is that like people are really unpracticed at supporting people in grief, right? Like it is really challenging for them. And what is people's best doesn't feel like often the right thing. And part of that is because there is no right thing, right? You know what I mean? Like when you're experiencing grief, there are so many different aspects that for much of the time, no matter what someone said to me about my dad, it was the wrong thing to say, right? Like that's sort of what it felt like. Right. But also this idea of like, I had to remind myself to be receptive to people's offering efforts, of intimacy with me, right? And that I couldn't filter it through, this is the exact way that I want it or need it. I also had to do a little translating to help receive what they were giving me in a meaningful way. And that is still true. And I've gotten much better at sort of asking people for what I need, but I was certainly not capable of it in the first months after my dad died. So I want to just like, I want to hold that for you and also like tell you like as a two as well, you don't need to do caretaking in order to receive caretaking. Right? You don't need to be showing up fully right now to support your friends and all of the stuff that they're doing and helping them through all of their problems. Cause that's what twos hear or understand is that like, I need to take care of other people so that I can, they will reciprocally take care of me. And I'm going to say in this moment that reciprocal aspect is out the door, right? Like you are, in the terms of like the triage of whose needs need to be met most immediately, it's yours. Your biological dad just died. So I want you to sort of let go of that a little bit. You will always come back to that caretaking because you are a beautiful, wonderful two, and you will be able to give back some of what you've received from your friends, but you don't need to do it right now in this moment. Right now, the focus needs to be on you doing what you need to do to get to tomorrow. And then after that to the next day. And then after that to the day after that. Right. And that is a challenge right now. And that needs extra love and support from the people around you.
I think also, like, in summary, for anybody out there, who this is not the most relatable letter because it's so particular to the letter writer's experience, but it is relatable in that I feel like we often deny ourselves the experience, the emotions of the experiences we're experiencing, right? Because we think that other people have it worse, or other people won't understand, or we can't, rely on other people to love us perfectly or support us or whatnot. Like, basically, if anybody's taking anything from this letter, if there's something that you're experiencing right now that you are denying yourself, question why you are denying yourself the opportunity to feel it fully or move through it fully or express it to a loved one. There are people out there who want to try to support you in the best way that you can. And you deserve to reach out to your loved ones, to your community, to your partners, to your family. And most importantly, you deserve to be validated by yourself. This is all hard and all complicated. And yeah. All right, my darling, thank you so much for trusting us with this letter. We're thinking of you and your heart and your loved ones. And we hope this helps.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for writing. We love you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you are interested in more content from us, or if you are interested in ad-free episodes, you can support us on Patreon. If you support us on Patreon for as little as $5 a month, you'll get an additional bonus weekly episode, as well as access to a bunch of other perks. That's patreon.com/justbreakuppod.
You can slide into our DMs, send us your favorite relationship memes, but most importantly, you can submit your questions about all matters of the heart at justbreakuppod.com, which is also where you can find our merchandise.
Please remember to like, follow, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating and review, and consider support. This literally keeps our mics on and helps us reach more brokenhearted souls who need 2 random strangers giving them relationship advice.
Just Break Up is a production of Duvid Media, original music, recording, editing, producing, all magical things by our good friend Spencer Worth Davis. Make sure to check out his podcast and his music. And remember, it's okay if they don't get it. It's okay if no one else can relate to your pain or your experience. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try to be heard or understood or be taken care of. They don't have to get it in order to empathize. They don't have to get it in order to care for you. You're worthy of being taken care of, and you're allowed to be sad. And if all else fails,
just break up.